Welcome to Talk NYC's 2024 Spring Showcase, or mid-year celebration of documentary films and series. I'm Ruth Somalo, Senior Programmer at Talk NYC, and it's my pleasure to be speaking today with producer Huw Cordey, who will tell us everything we want to know about the fabulous docuseries Our Planet 2, brought to us by Netflix. Welcome, Huw. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
So, the first season of Our Planet was just groundbreaking and raising awareness of the world's rarest wildlife, most precious habitats, the threats that they face. But now in Our Planet 2, you're bringing us to a journey across the world, guided by Sir David Attenborough's amazing voice, unraveling the mysteries of how and why animals migrate. So, can you walk us through the different stages of production to accomplish this epic feat of production?
Yes, I can. I mean, firstly, it's about a 3 or 4 year project. We start off doing a lot of research, maybe for about 6 months. We gather all the best stories we can find and try to put them into the series structure, the episode structure. And then once we feel happy with that, we then start embarking on the filming side, which takes maybe 2.5 years. With a project of this nature, you definitely need 2 seasons. Because animals don't read scripts, and we all know how unpredictable the weather is. So you often need 2 goes at things. So after about 2.5 years of filming, then you have about 6 months of editing and post-production. So as an undertaking, it's a pretty big event, and often much bigger than anything else in television.
And do you work with many experts? Can you tell us the kind of different teams that you work with, like in the ground or in the writing room?
Yes.
And also, how much is a scripted ahead of time based on research, and how much is things I imagine in my head somebody up in a tree, for 6 months just looking intensely at some animals, but I know it's not exactly like that. So how does that work?
But it's not far off, though. I mean, we spend a lot of time in the field, and there's a lot of patience needed, as you can imagine. But in terms of experts, yes, we work with a lot of scientists. A lot of the stories that we come up with come from scientists who have worked with this various species for many years. We don't often work with scientists in the field. Often they're very busy, but we get a lot of their help from over the internet or from phone calls and Zooms, and then occasionally, yes, they do come out on location because they're doing some field studies. But natural history is a very specialized area of television. And so a lot of the people who work in this area are very specialized in doing it. I've worked 25 years in this industry making this kind of content. And so we come with a lot of specializations. We immediately know whether something's possible, for example. Stories are sometimes, when you get junior researchers come and present something and it sounds amazing, but I can tell, and an experienced producer can tell whether, that's realistic or not. It may have been a sort of a one-off. But, I think collating all this information from scientists, using the experts we have on our team, when we go on location, we feel pretty much ready and prepared, to record and film what we set out to film. But of course, that doesn't always happen. As you said, you imagine a crew sitting in a tree for 6 months. Okay, we can't afford 6 months for a small piece of behavior. But our shoots can be anything from 3 weeks to 6 weeks, and that often involves a lot of time waiting around where nothing happens at all.
Yeah, absolutely. But then when things do happen, you have this incredible technology that also, in your 20 years of experience making nature documentaries has changed a lot. Can you tell us a little bit about the dispositive and the mechanisms that you use to be able to get really up and close and personal with all these creatures so they don't freak out, and it's just amazing. Tell us a little bit about the technology and the mechanisms.
Yes. Well, I mean, obviously, it depends what you're filming. If you're filming large animals, it's very different from filming sort of tiny subjects where, you're having to get very close to and using macro lenses. Sometimes you're only, a few centimeters from your subject, if it's a sort of tiny spider or an ant. But if it's a mammal, you know, sometimes you're some distance away, you know, particularly if it's a predatory animal or sort of, a large mammal like an elephant. But you know, we have a huge range of lenses that we use in the field, and different styles, gyrostabilized systems, drones. We have so many different types of camera equipment, camera traps. But I think, you know, our staple lens is a very, very long lens, 1,000 millimeter lens. And, you know, this allows us to have a little bit of distance between our subject, because obviously we're trying to record, you know, wild behavior that's undisturbed. And, you know, with certain animals, you can't get too close because, you know, you're interfering with their behavior. But I think it's important to say that very often we're filming animals that are habituated. That means these are animals that are very used to having humans around them. This often happens when scientists are following them and studying them. And being very used to humans, you know, they don't freak out or change their behavior when camera teams get close. So that's very important. It's incredibly difficult to film an animal that's scared of you. So let's say you try to film in a place that there's a lot of hunting. You know, the animals will see a human associated with danger and run like the wind. So, you know, we're very careful about, you know, not just the behavior we're trying to film, but making sure that the animals and the locations where we're filming, you know, give us a fighting chance of getting what we set out to get.
And tell me a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced that and also like a particular example that really like impressed me was the shooting of the swarm of locusts with 200 billion animals in it. I
Yes.
just can't get my head around, filming that.
I mean, those numbers are astonishing, aren't they? I mean, how do you even sort of like conjure up that number, 200 billion? I mean, it's just remarkable. And it is thought to have been the biggest swarm in a generation, 2 generations, and certainly the biggest swarm that's ever been filmed. Now, you would have thought, and in fact, this is quite a good example, you know, showing the challenges of natural history filmmaking, because you would have thought something that size with so many animals would be quite easy to film. You know, something that's very rare, that's solitary, you know, that would be difficult to film. But you would have thought if the, you know, 200 billion insects creating in super swarms would be quite easy to film, but they're not, because they move really, really quickly. On top of that, locusts actually cause a lot of damage to agricultural crops. And so governments constantly, when they emerge, when these super swarms emerge, are constantly trying to kill them with insecticides. And, you know, filming them meant trying to sort of keep ahead of the planes, spraying them with insecticides. So, you know, you might sort of travel hundreds of miles and still see the swarm disappearing off in a different direction. They're very, very difficult to predict. So despite the size, that was still a very, very challenging sequence to film.
And am I correct? I think I read somewhere that you were filming in Ethiopia just before some crisis broke out.
Yes,
Or
well, there was a civil war in the north of Ethiopia, and that happened. It was beginning to kick off just sort of as the shoot was starting. But fortunately, you know, where we were doing a lot of the filming of the groundhoppers, these are the sort of the early stages of the locust swarms. They weren't in those areas, but the situation was getting pretty serious, and fortunately, as I said, we weren't filming in the areas that were very dangerous at that particular time, and we were out before things really did blow up. But that's always a problem when you're filming in very remote places across all kinds of countries. You know, you just read the news today. It's a very unstable world, and sometimes places that feel pretty stable can suddenly become extremely dangerous. And it's just one of the things we have to deal with. I mean, look what's happened in Russia. You know, now it's almost impossible to do any filming in Russia because of the situation there. And you know, when that happens, you either have to cancel the shoot, find an alternative, or or make other plans. We have to be
absolutely.
adaptable, like our you know, that's one of the big things of natural history. You have to be adaptable. You can't get too worried about things you can't control. You can't control wild animals. You can't control the weather. So you have to have a certain mindset when you go out. And if things aren't happening the way you want them to happen, you've got to sort of rethink your story, you adapt, move on, find an alternative. You've got to be quite resourceful.
And once we had, you have all these incredible scenes and incredible images. How do you build a narrative arc of the series? Do you work with scenes already, and then you see how they work together? And also tell us a little bit about these incredible cliffhangers that you included, in this series. That
Yes.
I'm with the little albatross until I see the next episode. What's going to happen with that poor little albatross whose parents abandoned him? Like, it's so emotional that you make us really care about these incredible animals.
Yeah, and that's something we planned right from the start. So when we're planning the series, obviously we need a narrative arc that goes across the episodes. But traditionally, natural history were quite episodic. They were standalone episodes, and Our Planet One is a good example of that. It's a series of standalone episodes about habitats. And what Netflix were finding, and certainly the audience research, was that people didn't watch every episode, or if they did, they watched it over a long period of time. And some episodes were watched much more than others. So if you were a viewer, you would say, oh, I really like jungles, but maybe I'm not so keen on I don't know, coasts. And so you miss that program out. And we had a lot of feedback, even though Our Planet was hugely popular. I mean, it's been seen by 100 million people. It was massively popular. Natural history on the whole has this episodic feel where people don't stick necessarily with every single episode. So, we listened to the research that came back from Netflix, and we were challenged by that and thought, okay, how do we get people to watch every episode like a drama? And we gave a lot of thought to that, and we decided to come up with this structure where the overall narrative was the journey of the Earth around the sun, because it's that journey and the tilt of the Earth that actually creates the seasons, and it's the seasons that make animals move. And so we had, therefore, a sort of a grand narrative over 4 episodes. So each episode represented 3 months, more or less. And so the next challenge was, how do we keep people watching from one episode to the next? And using that structure, it was kind of easier because they weren't standalone. It was a continuum. January went to February, went to March, and so we were able to sort of have a sequence and then sort of end it at a very exciting moment. The one you've just mentioned, for example, the albatross chick that's ready to fly. And you, as an audience, know that there are big tiger sharks in the water. So you want to know what's going to happen to that chick. He's just about to take off. And so, we gave it a lot of thought which subjects would work better with this cliffhanger approach. And I think the ones we picked worked really well. But what's extraordinary, and as I mentioned earlier, I've been very fortunate to have worked in this industry for many years. Nobody has ever done this. Nobody has ever tried the cliffhanger, which is a tried and tested strategy for so many different types of genre and TV genre, but nobody's ever tried it in natural history. So even though it seems like a simple idea, it was the first time anybody used cliffhangers in a natural history series, a big blue chip natural history series.
And it really works, I think. But also going back to our little albatross, like something that I've always wondered in nature documentaries is this little character that you created the same little chick that we see throughout the entire series, or are we like 3 albatrosses chicks later by the time he's trying to fly away and the shark is coming in? Because it really feels like you're following the same little bird all the time, or like the same character. But is that so, or is slightly different?
Well, I don't want to disappoint an audience, and of course there are times when we have to use other characters, and that's a well tried and tested method in natural history. But of course, where possible, we try not to do that. We try to make it as authentic as possible. And that example, the albatross, is the same one, because we were there for a whole. Right? It was the same one. We were there for nearly 2 months, actually. And so we were able to actually follow the same chick all the way through that process. So that's a very good one to choose. And, very often most of the story, if there's a character-driven story, it is of the same individuals. And you can do it more often with mammals than you can with insects, obviously, or reptiles. But sometimes you're forced to use other shots just as cutaways. But yes, on the whole, our characters are the same ones throughout, and it is absolutely true with the albatross chick.
That's incredible. And also like his story is also one of like the most poignant ones in terms of environmental message, because when you finally zoom out and you show us that beach completely full of plastic and how the other chicks are dying because their parents are feeding them plastic from the ocean, it really drives through the very strong environmental message of like how or attitudes are impacting the world. And can you tell us a little bit more about that from its conception? Like,
Yeah. Well, that's a very good example as well to show the impact humans had on this planet, because Laysan Island is one of the most remote islands on the planet. And then look at all that human waste that gets washed up there, and it just shows the reach of of humanity. But in terms of the environmental message, it sort of occupies a lot of our thoughts, because you can't work in natural history without being an environmentalist, without having a strong feeling of the changes that are taking place. I mean, especially somebody, like me, has been in the business for 2 or 3 decades. You go back to places and, very often they're not as good as they were before. It's always the case. So, it's very much part of everybody on the team. But we're also aware that environmental messaging can get boring. People feel like they're being hit over the head with this. And, we don't want to feel like we're constantly preaching to the converted. And so we have to be sort of intelligent. We have to sort of, think up new ways to try to get that same message across. Now, with a series like Our Planet 2, which is about migration, it was absolutely vital that we had this humanity in the story, because this was a story about animals migrating, and they face many, many challenges in weather and predators and so on, and natural barriers like rivers and all sorts of things. But today they face huge challenges from humans. If you're a whale, you've got shipping. If you're a pronghorn antelope, you've got to cross huge numbers of fences. And so it was very much part of the story. And so what we decided, rather than make it a sort of tag-on message, and you've seen those programs where, it's a beautiful natural history story and then they tag on an environmental message, but it ain't so good as you thought it was. We decided to bake in that message, throughout, and make it very organic. So where it was important, because it really did impact the species we were following, it was there. So, for example, like the pronghorn or the grey whales, or in the case of the albatross, that's what they have to deal with. This bird is one of the sort of, the biggest long distance travelers on the planet. But during their lives and raising their chicks, they're covering huge amounts of the ocean. And the way they find food is by sight. And a lot of the food that they eat are, bits of fish, dead squid, dead bits of fish that float on the surface. But if, cigarette lighters, cartridge printers, these things look like, from a distance, look like dead animals. And so the albatross doesn't know, and he just scoops up this plastic in its gullet and, unknowingly then feeds it to its chick. And you saw the consequences of that. And so, it would be impossible to tell that story without making reference to it. And as you said, it's a very poignant message.
it's also so strong when you see like the animals in the Arctic that don't even have a space to lay and rest for a minute in their journeys. That walrus
Yeah,
mother with a baby and those incredible aquatic images, and she's looking for a babysitter so she can go and hunt for her baby. Like it's so like it really like it touches your heart. It's like, oh my God, we're doing this. Do
I
you
know.
think that moving us and generating this empathy that you're generating is actually making us do things differently? Do you see an
I,
impact?
Well, I think what I would say to that is yes, we hope so, and I think you've expressed it very nicely. You know, you feel very emotional when you're watching that, and I think if you can create emotions in people, they will change, they will make differences, and that's what we try to do as filmmakers. Um, you know, in episode 2, we have that story of the polar bear and her 2 cubs. And you know, in the summer when there's far less sea ice around and increasingly less sea ice, they end up swimming a lot, and it's very, very tiring. They use so much energy. And in that particular story, you know, the female finds her way with her 2 cubs to this island, and there's one cub that's really, really struggling, and it can barely get itself onto land. Now, we filmed that in Svalbard in Norway, and we were with some very hardened Arctic people. And I'm not joking when I say that, you know, some of these very hardened Arctic people had tears in their eyes and were felt very upset just watching that scene, knowing that things would have been different 10, 15 years ago because they wouldn't have got to that situation. And, you know, you don't have to labor the point, but you can see what's happening. You can see it for yourself. And that whole scene was filmed over like 90 minutes, you know, relatively short period of time. And, you know, it's very, very poignant because you can see the female is just, the mother is so desperate to eat. She can't even sort of think too much about her cubs. You know, she can't sort of come and help them too much. She's got to find food because actually she's still breastfeeding them. So she's looking for food, and the other one's really struggling. And they finally, you know, the little chap finally gets to the top of the cliff, and she says, "Well, there's nothing else here. We've got to go." So he then has to, you know, head off with the mother, and you just know that it's not going to survive. You know that ultimately, unless they get very, very lucky in their next destination, the chances of that particular cub surviving are very small. So again, it's a very, very poignant moment in the film. And just to sort of back up about, you know, you saying about the challenges of filming natural history, that also was a very good example because we were had a 5 6 week shoot in Svalbard on this boat, very, very expensive shoot, and we saw no polar bears whatsoever for 3 weeks. I mean, the weather was bad, so there was a lot of mist around. You couldn't see anything. Just got, you know, we had a lot of bad luck, you know. And it wasn't until the last 48 hours of the shoot that we filmed most of our stories, and that was one of them. And then the other story was the one featured in episode 1 with the young polar bear trying to aquatic hunt. And that kind of sums up natural history. You know, you get these incredibly poignant moments, but they're filmed in very small moments over a long period of time. And, you know, you just got to keep the belief because you never know when it's going to happen.
One of the things that contributes to make it so emotional and compelling is the incredible sound design and the field recordings and the music design as well. Well, and the incredible voice, empathetic voice of Sir David Attenborough. Can you tell
Yes.
us a little bit about that aspect?
Yes, but I mean, let's start with David Attenborough. I mean, he obviously is you know, when it comes to narrations and natural history, he is the king. I mean, there's no one like him, certainly in the UK, and he's, you know, he's got a big following across the world. And I think what David gives you, not only, you know, he has that authenticity that very few people have. So when his voice is very distinctive, and when people hear his voice, they know it's the voice of authenticity. And that's very important in natural history. You've got to feel like you want to believe what the person's saying to you. But he's also a very good actor. You know, his brother was a very famous actor, but, you know, people used to joke that, you know, David was just as good as Richard Attenborough. And, you know, he's very good. You watch him in a recording booth, and he knows exactly when to emote. And of course, he's been doing it for many, many years, but he's extremely good at knowing exactly the pitch, not overdoing it, not underdoing it, you know, creating that excitement that you're talking about. And in terms of the sound design, yes, of course, that's incredibly important. We record all the wildlife sounds recorded on location. But then, of course, you need a certain amount of creativity in order to enhance that. And so we have some really talented sound designers here in our city, Bristol. who actually has, the guy that did the sound for Our Planet 2 has already won a couple of awards for his sound design on this series, including quite a big award in LA about a month ago. So, I'm glad you picked it out because it has been quite successful. And then the music, again, very talented musician, LA-based musician called Jasha Kleeb, and with his writing partner Tom Farnan, who's based in the UK. And it's just trying to find that right moment, the sort of the emotion and the melody, that the stuff that just doesn't get in the way of the sequence, that just lifts it from below. You don't want just sort of big orchestras sort of smashing across every sequence. I think the music is very successful. I like the music on the series. People are very, opinionated about music on the series. Not everyone likes it. You have a lot of different opinions, but I think it works really well because it doesn't get in the way of what we're trying to show.
There's some extraordinary epic moments of music, but also some like musical landscape that are almost like experimental in nature, like with warbling. I can't even remember, but I remember
Yes.
thinking, wow, this is like really interesting modern experimental music. And
Yes, and I think the locusts, when the hoppers begin their journey, I think that's a really good example of what you're talking about. Feels very contemporary, but very interesting, and it just draws you in. It doesn't sort of, get in the way of the narration. A lot of people complain about narration clashing with music, so you can't hear the narration as well. And I think we've kept the balance just. I hope the audience feels like that, but I think we've got the balance right.
I think so too. I want to go back to some of the words that come up right at the beginning of the series, when you talk about how humans left Africa for the first time 60,000 years ago, and we have not stopped moving since, and how our planet's health depends on the movement of animals. And then you go to say this incredible phrase, we are beginning to understand that all life on Earth depends on the freedom to move. And I cannot that really hit me in the heart really strongly because it directly relates to the freedom of movement for humans as well, and like how we
Absolutely.
deal with
Yeah.
immigrants.
Yeah.
So is it just me, or this is a very strong political?
No, I mean, obviously the series is not about that, but of course it's very, very relevant. I mean, we see it all the time today. And basically it's the same thing going on. So animals move, obviously, because where they are at that particular moment, the conditions aren't right to, for the next piece of behavior, let's say breeding or finding food, because of the seasonality. So something's not right. And so they move to another part of the world where they can get what they want. That's why a lot of animals move to the north and the Arctic. When they get 24 hours of sunlight, you get a huge boom in food. And that's how they survive. That's how we've got this incredible diversity on this planet, with animals having that freedom to move. So when conditions aren't right, they just move. And that's effectively what's happening with humans, in parts of Africa where the drought is just so severe, they can't survive, they can't grow crops. What would you do if you lived in those places? You'd want to move to find a better life. So it's the same thing. And when it comes to natural history, the integrity of habitats are like absolutely fundamentally dependent on migration, because so many animals living within those habitats don't live there full time. They come to make for the benefits of that particular time. And once they arrive, the animals that have stayed there, maybe predate them or whatever. It's incredibly important to have this exchange of wildlife across our planet.
So just because we have to wrap up, but I would love to continue talking to you, for days about this incredible series. Um, what can you leave us with, in terms of like, what is a couple of things that we can do as humans today that after watching this show to contribute to stop making, these habitats, so difficult for animals and for humans?
Well, I think it's quite difficult to answer that question because, for something that everybody can do, it's a challenge. But what I would say about this story and this subject. It's relevant to everybody on the planet, because wherever you live, you will be around animals that move backwards and forwards across the globe, across habitats, or across countries, at certain times of the year. And I think having an awareness of that and trying to make space for them. I mean, even, here in the UK, I have a house in Devon, with some land, and every April swallows come, and they've come all the way from Africa. This huge, tiny little bird that's come all the way from Africa to England, and they come to England because we have long summers and there's lots of insects. And I'm putting up sort of boxes for them to help them, enable them to nest, because nesting spaces for many migratory birds are declining. So there are simple things you can do in your own place. It doesn't matter whether you've got a postage stamp of a garden or something much bigger. I think there's ways in which you can help migratory animals, particularly birds. But I think just having an awareness of these animals that come and go, I think that's the starting point. And that's what we really wanted to do, make people aware of the challenges these animals were facing in our modern world. And, they're significant. They really are significant. And when people come together, they can change things. Already they're talking about changing shipping lanes. I mean, that must be a really difficult thing to do, because, these huge tankers and there's so much money at stake. But they're trying to change shipping lanes so they don't interact with the migratory paths of whales. Because not only are ship strikes causing the deaths of many whales, but the sounds of their giant engines are creating this really confusing underwater soundscape, which makes it difficult for them to communicate with each other. Now, I don't know whether we can solve that problem, but if we can move the shipping lanes away from the whale migratory paths, it's certainly going to help. And of course, people can write, to policymakers about that. People can always get involved. If it means something, they can get involved, writing letters, doing their little bit at home. I mean, to be honest, there is so much you can do to make the world a better place just by using fewer resources and less energy. But in terms of migratory animals, it's a little bit more challenging on an individual basis.
Well, let's hope that everybody watches this series and contribute as much as they can. Thank you so much, Huw, for this wonderful series and for talking to us today at Doc NYC Selects. And thank you, Netflix, for bringing us this show. And thank you, everybody at home, for watching.